Where were you when you found out that John F. Kennedy was killed?
Well, actually, I was in Vanderbilt Law School at the time. It was November the 22nd, 1963, and somebody walked in and whispered something to the professor, and then the professor just told us all that he had been shot, and we didn't know whether he was alive or dead at that time. And everybody was basically almost in tears, couldn't believe that someone would shoot the president, particularly a young president that everybody seemed to get along with well. And we all went into the Student Center and watched on television, and doctors came out and said he had passed away.
What 3 historical events stick out in your life?
When the president, John F. Kennedy, was assassinated, then when Martin Luther King was assassinated. One of the third things was when Reagan was president, we were in the midst of what we call the Cold War, and he said, "Tear down this wall," to the Russians. And they didn't do it at first. And finally, though, they tore down that wall. And I guess why that had meaning in my life was when I was in the Navy in 1962, I went and saw the Berlin Wall. And they allowed us, me and my friend, to just walk on the other side of the wall, the eastern side of the wall.
What president was your favorite president and why?
I get Bill Clinton. The reason I knew him, Al Gore was his vice president, and Al Gore was a friend of mine. So I went to Bill Clinton, both of his inaugurations, and like I said, Al Gore supported me when I ran in 1980.
What school teacher made an impact on your life?
I guess it would be Mary Helen Lowry, and it wouldn't be a guess, it would be. She was the English teacher at Montgomery Bell Academy. But being an English teacher, I never thought that I would end up being a writer. And as a judge for 35 years, I ended up writing over 2,000 opinions. And I could have never done that without the benefit of her help.
How did segregation affect your life?
I guess, we had sit-ins in Nashville in the early 60s, and the African-American community was really mistreated in those days.
What got you in the most trouble when you were a kid?
Well, actually, when I was a kid, I was growing up in a parsonage. My dad was a minister for 50 years, for 30 years, Woodmont Christian Church here in Nashville, Tennessee. So I didn't smoke, I didn't drink. I guess my biggest time of getting demerits in high school was when you were in study hall, you weren't supposed to talk. But I loved to talk to my friends, and so I would get demerits, but that caused me the most problems.
How did you pass the time when you were in the Navy?
When we were on the ship and we had spare time, I would play backgammon and gin with my friends, but that's how I spent my spare time.
What was your favorite family trip when you were a kid, and how did you get there?
My favorite trip was out west. Drove the car to Colorado, but that was probably my most exciting trip.
What was the hardest challenge that you had to overcome in your life?
I guess the biggest challenge of my life was in 1980. I was 41 at that time and had been on the bench for 10 years. And I was nominated to run against a guy named George Brown. We were running for a seat on the Supreme Court. And your dad helped me campaign that year, and so did your Aunt Helen and Carrie, and that was a real challenge to run in a campaign statewide where nobody really knew the name Drowoda, and that was a tough name when you're running against a guy named Brown. But I guess those were challenging times, and then I guess being on a court, the Supreme Court was a 5-member court, and I was definitely the youngest. And I was wondering when I went on whether I was going to have, my 20% of the vote. But they assured me that I would, and I did, and I really gained a lot from working with people that I admired throughout my life, and they were great mentors. And then as I became older, I became a mentor for some of the other younger judges. So I would say the 35 years on the bench were my biggest challenge.